You do not need to completely cut out any food group from your diet ever under any circumstances. Hello and welcome to another vlog on YouTube and podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts by the Fit Minds podcast. Coach Mariah Jean here. Today's podcast is going to be about, honestly, what I would see to be a very obvious topic to have knowledge on, and I need to keep reminding myself that not everybody is a sports nutritionist, a nutritionist in general, or a dietitian. And that is the topic of gluten and dairy being somewhat, blamed for bloating, excess bloating and weight gain. I've seen a common trend or theme alongside the carnivore diet, which I'll talk about that in a moment, with regards to people cutting out gluten and dairy from their diets. It's just this thing, they're just obsessed with doing it. And it's been for quite some time now. You'll notice that there has been a trend in the past, I'm going to say about 10 to 15 years, because it was around when I was a young girl where I started seeing it a lot more, where everyday people started cutting out more and more dairy and gluten from their diets in a bid to reduce their bloating, their digestive discomfort, and hopefully to help them lose weight. And I've said this in other podcasts, and I cannot stress this enough. You do not need to completely cut out any food group from your diet ever under any circumstances. There is definitely highlight to be paid to the idea that reducing certain food types might be a smart idea, but it's not actually going to be dairy and gluten that are at the center or the forefront of the root cause of your bloating, discomfort, unless, please don't jump down my throat, I've been getting this a lot lately, unless you are gluten intolerant, celiac, or dairy intolerant. This is a very broad spectrum, right? Gluten intolerance, dairy intolerance, and celiac, or even being completely allergic to cow's milk protein, or for example, completely allergic to lactose. Very rare. It's very rare in a human being that we are completely allergic to lactose, and it's because lactose is contained in breast milk. Right? Breast milk contains lactose. So lactose is a sugar, it's a carbohydrate, galactose specifically, and gluten is a protein found in wheat. And people are attacking lactose and gluten as the main cause of their bloating or their weight gain. Before I get too deep into this topic, I just want to preface this podcast with the fact that I am a fully qualified sports nutritionist with a postgraduate degree in sports nutrition. I'm insured and registered to practice, which means if you were to take me to court tomorrow, the advice that I've given you would be backed by scientific evidence that I have practiced studies in my assessments, my case studies. I had an experience last week where it almost turned me off doing a podcast this week because I was just so tired of it, where I posted a video on YouTube speaking out about how horrible the carnivore diet is. And I had this onslaught of comments from, yep, you guessed it, quite a few people who followed the carnivore diet, none of whom, or of which, who were qualified to speak on the topic, mind you. None of them were nutritionists or dietitians, so that's something I need to pay highlight to and pay credit to, is that these were not qualified individuals. These were potential patients of doctors who had prescribed the carnivore diet to them. And I did some research. The people that they'd quoted had no formal qualifications in nutrition, absolutely general practitioners, and some of those who have doctorates in certain fields, in medical fields, can undergo electorate subjects, which then allow them to provide basic nutrition advice and prescription. It's very difficult for us to know who that is, right? How are you supposed to know with your doctor or who you're following on the internet as to who's got what education where? And people can write a book on anything they want to. People can publish anything they want to on the internet. What I have to, and I cannot stress enough, is that I had a comment in there that mentioned, Mariah, you need to be quoting and referencing data and scientific studies more often. That would bore the absolute crap out of my listeners, number one. We've actually been shown from a marketing perspective as nutritionists to not do that, to try to hold back. Yes, absolutely. I could dig up all of the studies that I like with regards to falsely claimed gluten intolerances and lactose intolerances. I could dig up all of the studies proving why micronutrient deficiencies become a byproduct of the carnivore diet, right? And how we end up preventing cancer and disease, chronic disease long-term by consuming enough fruits and vegetables and grains, right? How it can't possibly be linked back to big pharma and big food because you can just grow your own food in your backyard if that were the case. And that we see there is a direct link if we really want to dig deep into it. If you really want me to cite the study, I can go and dig deep and do that in inbox format, but I'm not going to fill a podcast full of quotes and citations and references, which I did in my degree in nutrition. And this is what nutritionists and dietitians are for. If you were to walk into your doctor's office and you would ask for a prescription, let's say you said, I've got high blood pressure, I need a high blood pressure medication, or they've tested your blood pressure and you need a blood pressure medication. Would you then say to your doctor, I don't trust you. Show me the studies on blood pressure medications. In fact, I want you to reference every study on the success of blood pressure medications that you can right now. As I said, I'm more than happy to put them into my podcast, but I do believe that a lot of people would check out and tune out. If you would like to have an intellectual one-on-one discussion with me and would like to cite the studies, specifically you, and the world doesn't revolve around you, if you want that from me, let's have a normal adult conversation away from a public setting where this is presented in a format which is digestible by the everyday individual and public, so that you don't feel like I'm speaking down to you, so that you feel like you're in a position where you can understand what I'm saying and that it's not being thrown into citing nutrition basics and fundamentals from the 1995 textbook studies and the updated version has been published in 2023. Why do you need me to do that? Anyway, I won't get too deep into it, but I'm happy to do it. If you want to inbox me and message me about it, because some people like to hear this stuff. Some people like to see the studies and the evidence. Some people like it to be cited. Most of my listeners can verify they trust me. They understand because I'm a nutritionist. I have the registration. I have the insurance. You can look me up on the board of nutritionists, Sports Nutrition Australia. I am registered and insured. I'm actually a physically, legally practicing nutritionist versus someone who has written a random book on nutrition or on the keto diet or the carnivore diet, whereby they have gone and studied medicine at university and maybe they have not done any electives in nutrition, but somebody trusts them because they have a medical degree. There's a big difference between us, right? And the allied health professional field is very vast and broad, but don't go attacking nutritionists because we're not citing all these studies like some of these influencers are, who, in my opinion, when I do see them doing that, it's fantastic for other nutritionists because we're like, yeah, when that's true, and I'm really glad you cited that. And for people who have a really broad and really deep knowledge of, I'm kicking the stand, deep knowledge of nutrition and who want to learn more, awesome. Go and do a degree. Go and complete a degree and then come back and debate with me, right? Until you've completed a degree in nutrition or dietetics, I will not debate with you about nutrition because we are not on the same level of education, okay? If you're a client, if you're a receiving person on the end of a nutrition or dietetics plan, you cannot have discussions like this with qualified professionals, especially if your views don't align, unless you have got the significant study. You should be citing the studies versus someone who's actually gone and done that already, has completed the degree. Not going to get too much into it. So now I've got that out of the way. Now, if I get any more of these comments on my YouTube, I will just delete them and remove them. It's not because I'm trying to silence freedom of speech, whatever you call it. It's because misinformation is incredibly dangerous in this field. Telling people to go and eat meat and a ton of saturated fats is incredibly dangerous in this field because there are literally thousands of sports nutritionists and dietitians around the world who have done their studies, who've gone and done their time, who have got their qualifications, and we have an understanding of the scientific evidence and background and practical implications associated with this absolute mess of a diet, right? So now we're going to get back into lactose intolerance, gluten intolerance, and the unnecessary, I suppose, decisions people make by themselves, or it might be that they have gotten advice from a health professional, I won't say who, but a health professional, to cut out gluten and or dairy. Sometimes it's naturopaths that are doing this. Oh, I just need you to eliminate dairy and gluten, and they're not actually explaining why. You're inflamed, stop eating gluten and dairy. It's like, why? Tell me what is the reason? Oh, it's causing inflammation. Tell me how it's causing inflammation. Tell me about the processes that incur this inflammation. Now, one of the main reasons we end up with, unless you've been diagnosed with, and I mean as in if you've gone and got testing done, you've had your stools tested, you have had rigorous testing done to find out that you are a celiac, right? Or that you have severe gluten intolerance, or at least some sort of flag in your blood/stool that is showing, okay, here is some reactivity to the gluten protein. Fair. Probably, especially with being celiac, you need to avoid gluten. That is understandable, because you will get undesirable symptoms such as bloating. For some people it's diarrhea. For some people it's gassiness. For other people, it could be anything. They can get gout, all sorts of stuff. I'm just talking about the possibilities of what gluten intolerance and excess gluten consumption could do for celiacs, right? It can make people very sick. I'm not talking about those people, okay? If you have self-diagnosed yourself as gluten intolerant, don't do that, okay? Because it actually may be that you are torturing yourself further than you actually need to be doing so. And I'll explain why, and some simple swaps you can make if you do find that you tend to bloat, or that you do find you have digestive upset, or you experience constipation when consuming smaller amounts, larger amounts. You're going to know your threshold of wheat, okay? Dairy, same thing. If you are lactose intolerant, my mum has a true, genuine lactose intolerance. She experiences some horrible symptoms every time she consumes dairy of any sort. Any small traces of dairy, it's horrible for her. Okay, I don't have that problem, thankfully. So what she does is she takes lactase tablets so she can consume some things that do have dairy in them, and that then allows for her to have them without the symptoms. There are a lot of products out there as well that are dairy based that actually have the lactase enzyme added, which helps to pre-digest the dairy for you. Okay, and a lot of yogurts and cheeses, without even stating it on the label, actually contain this. If you just check the ingredients, if it says lactase enzyme, lactase enzyme, then you'll actually find that is going to be suitable for you to consume, even though it is a dairy product. Again, same thing with lactose intolerance. You need to be officially diagnosed. You will need to have tests done. Yes, you'll need to go to your general practitioner for this to then be able to have the tests ordered. Okay, that's why you go to the general practitioner. You don't go there to get diagnosed just because you've got the symptoms. You need to go there and get tested to then verify that yes, this is an actual fact. Okay, so that's tackling if you find you get bloated or you get digestive upset from dairy and or wheat. And I'm going to say wheat because it actually generally is wheat more than it is gluten. Okay, I'll talk about this and why. So I'll talk about this and then I'll talk about why we don't need to do it for fat loss or weight loss. For dairy and gluten, they're completely different. Dairy, the issue with dairy being lactose or galactose as a carbohydrate is that it is a sugar that for some people, they do not produce the enzyme to be able to digest dairy efficiently. Okay, this can be something that arises early onset as a child. It can also be something that develops later on in life. People can also recover from it, meaning that they can, through gradual exposure, this can change. Some people, it's a lifelong thing, okay? One of the main reasons for this is going to be due to the fact that it is another animal's milk source from cows. However, we do know that we need a certain amount of dairy to meet our calcium requirements. Again, I don't need to cite studies for this. It's literally the content from my nutrition degree, which has come from a plethora of different studies and textbooks and government recommendations and guidelines. But hey, we're all against the government, apparently. So, conspiracy theorists honestly have been a time for me lately. Anyway, and what's wild too is that if we don't trust modern day science and what is up to date and up to scratch in the highest of professional fields, as high as you can go, right, in nutrition and dietetics, and now we're trusting this nut job over here who has no nutrition qualifications and is just pulling shit out of his ass, basically. If we are in such distrust of modern day science and nutrition, how are we to know the difference between this guy's opinion and what is considered to be factual from a university level degree, right? You could literally go around going, okay, well, how do we know this guy's right? How do we know he's right? How do we know that there aren't flying saucers and we need to wear tinfoil hats? How do we know that? If we're going to be so distrusting of everything, how do we trust that the reality in front of us is even real? If we really want to start to be so distrusting in modern science and the fields that people specialize in and the degrees that they get, if we want to be so, skeptical, then we may as well start to be skeptical of every single person we speak to the extent where we believe nobody. Trust me when I say there's a reason why specific sciences exist and why each one of those practitioners should remain as much as possible in their field, in their lane. So that's why I stay in my lane. So, okay, back to the lactose situation. So the official diagnosis is needed beforehand. If not, if you've gone and got these tests done. If you haven't and you're telling me you're lactose or gluten intolerant, I don't believe you. You need to get the tests done. I'm not gaslighting you. You need the tests done so then you aren't cutting these things out of your diet unnecessarily. If you have gone and got the tests done, you're not lactose intolerant, you're not gluten intolerant, and you're saying to yourself, okay, why then am I responding so negatively from a digestive perspective to wheat and dairy? Now, I'm going to pose an idea to you. Sometimes it's not necessarily the food item that we are having trouble with, but the amount of that food that we're consuming. I'll use a good example. If we were to overconsume any type of food in a day, let's say we had 9 oranges, 10 oranges in a day, right? We've just consumed 10 oranges. Do you think that there would be a side effect of some sort, digestive-wise, GI tract discomfort from that overconsumption of that food? Probably. You might get some heartburn because it's quite acidic. You might find it's quite fibrous as well, so you might shit your pants. And the reason why I talk like this in layman's terms is because this is more easily relatable and digestible by the everyday human being. So if you don't like the way I present vlogs, don't listen to them, right? I'm not going to change the way I present them to sound smarter, because by doing that, I then end up reaching out to the wrong audience. I'm not trying to reach out to other professionals, and nutritionists. I need some afternoon tea. I need some carbs. I'm not trying to reach out to those people. I'm actually trying to reach just everyday people that want to digest and listen to this information. Okay, so if we have not been diagnosed, and let's say we're over-consuming a certain type of food, what happens is that a lot of the time we end up accidentally over-consuming something without even unknowingly, right? So if you think about it, if you have full cream milk in your breakfast, you then have cheese and ham and cheese sandwich for lunch. Let's say your breakfast is full cream milk with full cream milk, glass of milk with 2 white bread pieces of toast and butter. So you've got full cream milk is dairy, the butter is dairy, it also contains saturated fats, and so does the full cream milk. And then you've got white bread, and the white bread is wheat. And then for morning tea, you're having we'll call it a ham cheese tomato wrap, brekkie wrap of some sort, because you decided that breakfast wasn't too filling. So you're having a wrap, which is wheat again, and then you're having cheese again, which is dairy. And then for lunch, you've decided, I'm not that hungry because I had a pretty big morning tea or whatever it might be, or maybe you've had the ham cheese tomato wrap, and maybe for morning tea, you are having a full cream with whipped cream. So you've got dairy on dairy and saturated fats in the full cream milk and also in the cream. And then for afternoon tea, you've decided, I'm still really hungry and I want to have a bag of some sort of biscuits, right? And you've just devoured a whole bag of, choc chip cookies. You've just demolished them. And then you're like, I really feel like an ice cream. And you've had So you've then had wheat and you've had dairy again. Now, there's been no fruit, some tomato on the wrap. Okay, no veggies. So see how we're not actually ticking in any other boxes here. No other types of grains. You haven't selected brown rice. You haven't even chosen bread that could be of a darker color. Yes, the darker the bread, the better. And then you get to dinner and you go, I'm gonna have a burger for dinner with cheese again. I have a burger with cheese, or I'm gonna have battered fish with fish and chips, and I'm gonna have aioli sauce with dairy, and or the burger's gonna have cheese and aioli sauce because we're just more dairy and more wheat. Okay. Now you're probably thinking, I probably hate, nutritionist hates wheat and dairy. Obviously she's gonna tell us how bad this is for us, right? Nowhere along the line in this day Does the fact that you're consuming a lot of wheat and dairy in your day have anything to do with? Yes, it will definitely influence, but it doesn't mean that just because you're eating wheat and dairy that it's going to make you gain weight. Okay, you could technically eat only wheat and dairy as long as you're within your calorie requirements. And I talk about calories because they do matter. As long as the amount of energy you're eating, let's say you eat one McDonald's meal a day and it just equates to the maintenance of the amount of calories you need to consume to maintain your weight. But let's say it was just nothing, but you decided to have a cheeseburger without the meat and you just had cheese and bread and you had a full cream coffee with whipped cream. Let's say that was your total calories the day you consumed it and you maintained your weight. You wouldn't actually gain weight over time. If you continued eating the same thing every day, probably would start to feel like shit because you're not getting a lot of micronutrients, right? You're not getting a lot of fruits and vegetables, other grains. And you would feel a bit bloated and yucky. Why though? Why is it that we're associating wheat and dairy with this bloating, discomfort, and weight gain, right? And it is because we see that when people consume large amounts of wheat, large amounts of dairy beyond the recommended guidelines, that yes, they will experience GI discomfort because your digestive tract or your digestive system does not want the same shit over and over and over again. It actually wants and craves variety. And technically, we should be consuming anywhere between 50 to 70 different types of foods per week, but the average individual is not doing that, right? We need variety in our diets to be able to reach nutrition requirements from all types of vitamin and mineral groups, right? This is why the carnivore diet doesn't work, because you're looking at completely neglecting vitamins A, D, E, and K, right? Because meat is fairly deficient in those. Definitely very rich in other minerals, but not in vitamins. Vitamin C, right? So, off that topic, because I could talk about that forever. But if you only consume, in the same breath, if you're consuming large amounts than required of wheat and dairy, specifically white bread, it's not that white bread is bad for you, it's the amount that you're consuming that could very likely be the reason why your GI tract is upset, is distressed, why you're experiencing bloating, etc., etc. Also, not consuming any plant fiber alongside that, so from fruits and vegetables, is likely why your gut health is struggling, because you're not getting enough of the good soluble fiber that you need to help digest and move through gut matter such as chyme, right? So bulk, stool bulk, to move it through your GI tract. So you can end up with things like gassiness. Your stomach is really struggling to pull this stuff through because the fiber contained in bread, insoluble fiber, and also in white bread is generally in most white breads is not of a type that your body actually needs a large amount of. You need smaller amounts of insoluble fiber in your diet. And when you consume white bread, the other interesting thing, it's not white bread's bad. You can have some white bread here and there. It's not going to kill you, right? Some baked goods. But if you're finding that, oh, okay, my threshold is I have a croissant and then I have white bread for lunch and then I have white bread for dinner and I'm starting to feel a bit sicky and yucky, it's very likely that you've gone over your own personal threshold, okay? My partner's crazy. He can have white bread every single meal of the day and it doesn't bother him as much. So that's okay. Everyone's different. All of our gut microbiome is so individual to the person. It is as individual as a thumbprint. Now, this is scientific study from my degree and my CBD assessment update. If you want to reference it, you can just Google Sports Nutrition Australia and go and get your own degree. I don't know what more you want from me. Let's reference the studies I've been given. So this is what we're talking about here. So it's like, okay, cool. Maybe I find my threshold is generally, for me personally, I can only really have 1, maybe 2 servings of white bread a day. And I find that anything past that, I tend to get a bit bloated, a bit uncomfortable. The other thing with white bread is that, and again, this goes back to agricultural times, and I talk about agriculture quite a bit. Over time, we have genetically modified the wheat grain. Why? Because we can make more of it, it is less disease-ridden, and it's something that over time that we have made the perfect wheat grain. Unfortunately, by doing that, we have stripped some of the really essential nutrients out of it, especially with the white wheat grain. And it's now much cheaper to produce and make in larger amounts without its disease-resistant, etc. So, that means it's not as, well, we could argue it's not as good quality, I suppose, versus say a rye or, for example, if you bake a sourdough, you make a sourdough bread, because the sourdough bread itself goes through a fermentation process which pre-digests the gluten for you. Okay, and this is why sourdough is awesome. This is why a lot of people will find It's really weird. White bread doesn't agree with me that much, but then I have sourdough and it does. That's because you're not, it's not the actual gluten or wheat in general, but maybe just the type of bread. Maybe we just need to start to shift more towards sourdough, rye, darker breads, wholemeal. This is why in nutrition guidelines and recommendations, we actually recommend you favor consuming wholemeal bread over white bread. It's not because white bread's the devil. It's just because nutrient comparison wise, the things like the folic acid content of wholemeal bread is higher. The fiber content is of a better quality, right? It moves through the GI tract more efficiently. It is digested easier, right? So this is where we're looking at putting facts on paper as to why brown bread is sometimes more ideal than white. It doesn't mean you can't consume white bread, white wraps. It just means be mindful. Okay, if you find white bread's no problem for you, keep eating it. If you find, again, as I said, different, if you have cookies and then you have white bread and then you have a wrap and then you have a burger, you have a bun, right? There's obviously going to be a tipping point for your digestive system where you can't handle it. That's okay. That doesn't mean that tipping point where you get bloated or GI distress, it doesn't mean that you're going to gain more body fat if you are bloated or if you are experiencing GI distress. It just means you're bloated. So you could still be within your calorie limits. And this is where weight gain and calories are a separate topic to how much wheat you eat, okay? Like they're just separate unless the wheat in general, I guess, is contributing towards your total calorie intake and putting you over. In which case you could argue it's the other foods you've eaten in the day. Unless you're eating an entire packet of cookies and that probably did put you over your calories for the day, but it's not wheat that's the problem, it's the fact that you ate a whole packet of cookies that is very calorie dense. And that doesn't mean wheat is calorie dense, it just means those cookies were. Okay? This is where other ingredients contained in bread and wheat products comes into play. And I'll talk about dairy in a second, but it's very similar in a sense of over-consuming that particular thing. Okay. One very, how would I put it? Non-obvious. It's not an obvious thing, right? Ingredient or topic or, food group that doesn't get enough of a bad rap is saturated fats. I'm not talking about seed oils, okay? No, I'm not doing that. Saturated fats are, if you look them up, they are still to this day the only food group, right, that consumed over a certain amount in your diet percentage-wise will result directly in negative health implications. So more than 10% of your total daily intake. Again, for those haters out there who are like, you need to reference. You can find this on nutrition guidelines for nutritionists and practicing dietitians. It's not like this thing I pulled out of my butt. So 10% of total daily intake. I can get my textbooks up there. If you want me to read it to you, I can. It's very boring. But that is the correlation. No other food group, not sugar, not wheat, not dairy, because they are all smaller food groups. Sugar is obviously going to be carbohydrates and saturated fats being in fats, but saturated fats are directly linked with, right, exacerbated heart disease, cholesterol issues, no matter what your calorie intake is. So you could be like this skinny person who consumes hardly any food, hardly any calories, but if you overconsume your saturated fat percentage, you still have the risk of heart disease. So that's something you need to consider. What is really interesting about saturated fats and fats that are added to foods that we don't think about, things like added oils, okay? Butter, this type of stuff, right? Full fat cream versus light dairy. These fats, these extra fats, fatty cuts of meat, eating the fat on a meat, eating the skin on meat, these are very calorie dense. These have a lot of energy contained in them. So you can imagine that, you have a tablespoon of olive oil or you have chicken skin, right, which is quite oily. You have the chicken skin and you put that next to 2 slices of bread. Now, for the same volume, if you could have 100 grams of chicken skin versus 100 grams of bread, the chicken skin will be far more calorie dense. It has more energy contained in it. So when you think about it, right, that logically, it is easier to overconsume your total calories by accidentally or unknowingly consuming a larger amount of fats, and saturated fats are probably more threatening. The thing that we're seeing with a lot of packaged foods, especially wheat-based and dairy-based foods, is unfortunately the high saturated fat content, high fat content in general. This doesn't mean you need to go around cutting all the fats out of your diet. It just means that you need to be mindful of the idea that, holy shit, what am I eating that has hidden fats, right? Oh, fuck, it's not the dairy, it's not the wheat, but the fats that are contained in it, and how can I actually navigate this so that I am not consuming as many of these food items? It's funny, this is one of the changes you could actually make to your diet without having to do much at all, which would allow you to lose weight without even having to track any calories. And that is literally being mindful of added fats that are in processed items that you are consuming. And trust me, almost every food is processed to some degree. But things like a croissant, right? It's actually not the pastry, it's the butter and the fat added to it, which adds up calories faster than the pastry itself, right? It's not the wheat and the breadcrumbs and the bread or whatever is contained in a cookie, right? The flour, but the added fats to the cookie that brings up the calorie content. You can't make cookies though without some form of fats, right? And so you start realizing, holy shit, I have been demonizing gluten and dairy, not realizing that it's not always the wheat, it's not always the flour, it's not always the milk itself, but the full fat options we're using. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use low fat options for everything, all of your dairy, but things like yogurt, for example, is a really easy test for you to do. If you consume, let's say, some full cream milk, you do a test, you go, okay, that doesn't agree with my tummy. Try consuming light milk or skim. Just try. And what you might find is that just that switch alone helps your digestion, but not only that, in the same breath, it actually helps you consume less total calories, which then will also help your weight loss goal. And then in the same breath, yes, we can consume full fat yogurt. There's this whole thing about full fat yogurt's better for you. That's a lie. It's just full fat. It just has more fats in it, okay? Dairy is less of a problem than added fats from oils and things because it's digested slightly differently. But if you are finding it's the full fat dairy that's the problem and you're going for the lighter choices and you're consuming it and you're going, oh, my gut's fine with that, it's probably going to be the fats that was in the dairy that you were consuming, not necessarily the dairy. Yogurt is a fantastic option for digestion because it's, again, pre-fermented. So yogurt has digestive, has the probiotics, in them, right? So some yogurts may not. Probiotics, which are fantastic for your gut health and gut bacteria. And so yogurt can actually be a fantastic option for dairy to consume. But let's say you've tried a full fat yogurt, still doesn't agree with your digestive system. You can go for a low-fat yogurt or a high-protein low-fat yogurt and see how your GI tract likes that. If you can only have a small amount, awesome. If you can have a larger amount, still awesome. You might find it's not the yogurt, but the full-fat yogurt that doesn't agree with your digestion, Same thing with bread. It may not be the white bread, the amount of white bread and white wheat that you're eating, or the wheat that you're eating that has added saturated fats or added fats to it. So other things that are added that bring up the total fat content of the meal, which we know saturated fats also interrupt digestion and gut bacteria significantly. That's why a lot of people who consume really fatty meals have digestive distress, is because the fats are not agreeing with their gut. This is not me saying you need to follow a fully low-fat diet, but maybe look at starting to pull the fats out from the animal fats you're consuming, like butter, like the added processed oils and things which aren't animal fats, but this is the stuff that we're looking at, is that the evidence supports that, okay, maybe we're having a little bit too much vegetable oil, saturated fats are increasing too much. Maybe we need to pull our saturated fats back. Maybe we need to pull our animal fats back, so fats consumed from animal meats and animal products, to a point where we know that our threshold, we can tolerate it. And it might be that you remove butter and you replace it with something like light Nuttelex, which is olive oil. And we know olive oil is notoriously a better option for an oil. It's just something that we process better digestive-wise and is much better for our heart health versus butter or margarine. The studies have been done. I'm just not going to cite them. So maybe it's that we start introducing healthier fats, such as avocado, nuts and seeds, plant-based fats that are not coming from processed vegetable oils. Because the issue here is that we're getting really confused with oil types and what's more ideal. And it is hard because there's a lot of conflicting stuff out there. But typically we see that you want to make sure that you've got those kind of single origin oils. So extra virgin olive oil tends to be a really safe one if you want to cook with it or bake with it. Coconut oil is a really interesting one because although it is a saturated fat, it is processed differently by our bodies. So it's weird, but there's these weird little exceptions, and we've found them. Coconut oil is one, olive oil is another. Eggs, they have good cholesterol, which is, you'll see improvements and increases in HDL. Yes, someone was arguing about cholesterol in one of the last vlogs. There is good and bad cholesterol, and we don't want more LDL, and eggs do not elevate LDL cholesterol. Salmon helps to increase good cholesterol and not bad cholesterol. And yes, there is a vast difference between the two, because when you get your bloods done, this is literally what flags is good and bad cholesterol levels. Most of the time we're seeing people with elevated LDL because they're just unknowingly consuming larger amounts of saturated fats in their diet. So very common, fatty meats, full fat dairy, lots of it, larger amounts of cream, that type of stuff, butter, etc. And not consuming enough of those healthy fats in quotation marks, because I don't really like using that terminology. So now, hopefully I haven't confused you or lost you. So we're realizing that digestive GI distress and bloating can be a separate issue, entirely topic to, say, weight gain. And yes, absolutely, when you're bloated, etc., you probably gain a kilo or two from an inflammatory perspective for sure, but that's not necessarily associated with body fat. So that's something to consider in that aspect. And that wheat and dairy can, yes, if you have full fat dairy and if you're having lots of bread, I suppose, and lots of wheat products, yes, you can go over your total calorie intake, which then, yes, can lead to weight gain. But you could do that by eating, too many salami sticks. You could eat too much of anything and gain weight. And it'd be very difficult to do it with fruits and vegetables, but then you'd be iron deficient because you wouldn't be consuming enough meat. So it's like, this is where balance comes in, and where as nutritionists, it's our job to write meal plans, which actually factors in you getting lots of different types of food from different food groups and trying to eliminate and get rid of, or at least reduce food groups which can be harmful. But as I said, you don't need to fully eliminate any food group. Saturated fat is just something we need to reduce, but you can still have some of it in your diet. This is why I always say you don't need to fully cut anything out of your diet. It's just some things we need to have a little bit less of, and some things we need to have more of. But there's no food group under the sun other than, for myself, other than alcohol, which I would probably not be consuming as a choice myself, because it's a non-essential nutrient. So hopefully this makes sense. Again, if you want to bark up my tree about facts and science and citing studies, go and follow Sports Nutrition Australia as a page. They have all of the studies cited. That is their literal job. That's the whole role of the association, and this is where all of my information comes from because I studied through them. And also Institute of Performance Nutrition in the UK. These are all registered bodies. They are legally backed by, I think SNA is a non-for-profit, backed by university level studies with people with literal doctorates who've written their entire theses and have the entire institutions dedicated to these sciences. And it's global. This is a globally recognized science. So please, before you speak, please understand that this is not me talking shit out of my ass. This is because I'm a qualified professional. You don't go into your doctor's office and question them and their prescriptions that they give you for certain things. So please, you can question me if you want to, but let's get into an individual debate as opposed to posting absolute gobbledygook nonsense on my YouTube vlogs and podcasts when you've got no idea what you're talking about and you have no qualifications to back your opinions. So, there's people I'll debate with and there's people I won't even be bothered with. So hopefully all that makes sense. I won't talk too much about on the weight loss concept, but if you do want to see some improvement in your weight loss results and you don't want to track calories, one of the easiest things you can do is literally change your full fat dairy to low fat. Full fat ice cream, low fat ice cream. Such a simple swap for the same amounts, and you will cut out a huge amount of calories from your diet. And then maybe bring back in some natural fats that you may not have been eating before, like avocado, nuts and seeds, which would actually be quite good for your digestion, really good for your general health, getting more micronutrients in a broader spectrum. And also things like vitamin E, omega-3s, etc., which you may not actually have been reaching or attaining from your higher dairy intake. So remember, it is not an all or nothing, black or white approach. You do not need to be over this end of the scale where you're eating nothing but dairy and wheat, gluten and dairy, or wheat and dairy, sorry. But you also don't need to be down this end of the scale where you are completely cutting it out. It might be a case of tweaking, changing, reintroducing more fruits and vegetables into your diet as well. And maybe then the wheat and dairy won't impact you so heavily because you've also got these other really healthy micronutrients and fiber and water introduced to your GI tract, which allow for a really balanced gut flora. And that's what we want. There is a literal rainforest inside of your tummy, and balance is key for a balanced digestive system is key for balanced health, right? It is definitely that pyramid, that food pyramid. As much as people like to poke holes in what has been known for so long and has been studied for so long, it hasn't changed much since it was first introduced. We have learnt more things, but we learnt more about nutrition in the early days, and now we're just trying to spend most of our time debunking myths and deflecting. Unfortunately, the misinformation that we've found is spreading like wildfire on the internet. So it's disappointing because nutrition doesn't need to be that complex, but unfortunately we're at that point now where we're overcomplicating it. All right, so that is it from me. I get very passionate in my podcast. It's just how I talk, it's how I present. Remembering that this is not a university case study. This is not none of my podcasts are. They're not assignments. You're not my lecturer. I'm not handing in a study to you when you don't have the qualifications to be skeptical of me. When you do, we will talk. All right, thanks a lot. Looking forward to doing another podcast for you soon.